The camera is tight on your face. You are looking directly into the lens, calm, but with a terrifyingly cold smile. In the background, you can hear the muffled sound of a party, clinking glasses, and laughter. My parents invited the entire family to my 25th birthday party, just so they could watch me get executed. My father stood on a chair, raised his glass, and told everyone that as of tonight, I was no longer a sterling. He called me a financial parasite and served me papers to disown me in front of the people I've known my whole life. He told me I had 60 minutes to pack my bags and get out of the apartment he graciously paid for. The whole room laughed. My brother even recorded it on his phone. What they didn't know, my father's company went bankrupt 6 months ago. The only reason he still has a roof over his head is because an anonymous investor bought his debt. I didn't tell him that I was that investor. I didn't tell him that the disgraced daughter he just kicked out is actually his new landlord. I just looked at my watch and waited for the clock to hit 8:00 p.m. because in exactly 60 seconds, the lion is going to realize he's been living in a cage I built. The medical shock of the room was palpable, but it wasn't coming from me. It was vibrating off the walls of the Sterling estate, a house that smelled of old money and new lies. My father stood there basking in the glow of his own cruelty, while my mother adjusted her pearls, looking at me with the kind of pity one reserves for a stray dog that finally had to be put down. They thought they had delivered a surgical strike to my future. They thought that by taking away my name, they were taking away my power. Well, my father barked, gesturing toward the door. The clock is ticking. Maya, or do you need the janitor to show you where the exit is? I didn't move. I set my briefcase on the mahogany table, the same table where my father had signed the predatory loans that had secretly gutted the family business. You keep talking about the Sterling name, Dad, I said, my voice cutting through the whispers of my cousins like a surgical strike. But you've been trading on a name that's been hollow for years. You told everyone here that you're disowning me because I'm a leech. But let's look at the ghost ledger of this family, shall we? I opened my briefcase and pulled out a single thin tablet. I didn't need a stack of papers. My empire was digital, invisible, and absolute. 8 months ago, Sterling Textiles lost its contract with the European luxury markets. You didn't tell Mom, and you certainly didn't tell your golden boy son. You took out a private bridge loan from a firm called Ether Global to cover the payroll and keep this social mask of an estate running. Do you remember who signed that loan, Dad? My father's face went from a triumphant red to a sudden ashen gray. The glow in his eyes flickered. That's a private business matter, Maya. It has nothing to do with your failure as a daughter. It has everything to do with it, I replied, stepping closer. The mirror paradox was finally flipping. You see, you thought I was playing with data in my bedroom. You thought my consulting was a hobby. But Ether Global isn't a firm. It's a shell. And I am the sole shareholder. I didn't just buy your debt, Dad. I bought the rights to this house, the cars in the driveway, and the very chair you're standing on. A collective gasp moved through the drawing room. My sister, the power attorney, dropped her wine glass. It shattered on the marble, a sharp, crystalline medical shock that signaled the end of their era. She rushed forward, her social mask crumbling into panic. That's impossible. Ether is a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. You're Maya. I was Maya, I said, turning to her. The girl you mocked at every dinner. The girl you used as a footstool for your own ego. But in the digital world, I am the architect. And while you were busy billing hours for clients who don't exist, I was quietly liquidating the Sterling assets to prevent a total collapse. I wasn't being a recluse. I was being a janitor, cleaning up the mess you and Dad made of this family's legacy. My father grabbed the edge of the table, his powerful boss stature collapsing into the frame of an old, broken man. You own the house? I own everything, I said, checking my watch. The resolution was exactly on time. And since you were so adamant about the Sterling rules about only winners deserving a place at this table, think it's time we apply those rules to everyone. You gave me 1 hour to leave your house. But since this is my house, I'm giving you 10 minutes to explain to the family why the Sterling name is officially under permanent foreclosure. The glow of the room seemed to dim as the reality set in. I wasn't the victim of a birthday massacre. I was the one holding the blade. The lion had finally found out that the ghost he had been haunting was actually the one holding the keys to his cage. The room was no longer a celebration. It was a crime scene of the sterling ego. My brother, Leo, and my sister Claire stood frozen, their social mask of superiority dissolving into a medical shock of pure panic. They looked at me as if I had suddenly transformed into a stranger, unable to reconcile the hidden sister they had bullied with the woman who now held their entire lifestyle in the palm of her hand. My father was still clutching the table, his breath coming in shallow hitches, while my mother looked around, the room as if searching for a resolution that didn't involve her losing her status. "You're lying," Claire finally hissed, stepping over the shards of her broken glass. Her voice was sharp, a surgical strike of desperation. "You couldn't possibly own Ether Global. You don't have the vantage. You're just trying to scare Dad because he finally stood up to you. This is just another one of your pathetic ghost games." I didn't argue. I simply swiped a finger across my tablet, casting a document onto the large hidden projector screen behind the bar, the one they usually used to show off family highlights at parties. Instead of a slideshow of vacations, it displayed a ghost ledger of the Sterling family's personal debts. "Let's talk about gifts, Claire," I said, my voice echoing with a cold, rhythmic resolution. "That diamond-encrusted watch on your wrist? You told Dad it was a bonus from your firm, but the firm didn't pay for it. You billed it to a Sterling corporate account that was already overdrawn. And Leo? That custom sports car sitting in the driveway? The one you told everyone was a gift for your successful surgery year? The lease is 6 months behind. You've both been living on the glow of a dying star." The screen flickered, showing the itemized list of every luxury they had flaunted. The permanent foreclosure on their pride was written in digital ink. I saw my aunts and uncles, the people who had spent the last hour whispering about my disgrace, suddenly pull back, their eyes wide with the realization that they were witnessing a status flip of tectonic proportions. "You said I had an hour to pack my bags," I said, turning to my parents. "But since this house and everything in it is technically collateral for the Ether loans, I think we should start the inventory now. Dad, the watch. Mom, the necklace. Claire, the earrings. These aren't family heirlooms anymore. They're assets of a liquidated estate." "You can't be serious," my mother whispered, her hand instinctively flying to the sapphire pendant at her throat. "Maya, it's your birthday. We were just trying to motivate you. We didn't mean to actually hurt you." The medical shock of her lie was almost laughable. "You invited 50 people to watch my execution for motivation? No, Mother. You wanted the glow of being the parents who were too good for their failed daughter. You wanted to prune the dead branch so the rest of your golden tree could shine brighter. But you forgot that I'm the one who's been watering the roots." I stepped toward Leo, who was backing away toward the door. "And Leo, don't think about the car. The GPS kill switch was activated 5 minutes ago. It won't even start. You wanted to see me be independent with nothing? Well, now you get to see what it's like to be a Sterling with nothing but a name that no longer carries a scent of credit." The room was thick with the scent of lilies, and the cold metallic tang of a surgical strike gone perfectly. My father finally spoke, his voice a broken rasp. "What do you want, Maya? You've humiliated us. You've taken the house. What more do you want?" "I don't want your humiliation, Dad," I said, closing my tablet with a decisive clack. "I want the resolution. You promised. You told me the Sterling name is only for winners. I'm simply enforcing your own policy. Since I'm the only one in this room who's actually won anything, I think it's time the janitor took out the trash." I looked at the clock. It was 8:15 p.m. The guests were already starting to slip toward the foyer, desperate to escape the permanent foreclosure of the family they once envied. The lion was sitting in his own drawing room, surrounded by his golden children, and for the first time in 25 years, he was realizing that the only thing holding up the ceiling was the daughter he had just tried to throw away. The silence in the drawing room was so heavy it felt like a medical shock to the lungs. My father's hand trembled as he reached for a glass of water, but he couldn't even bring himself to drink. He just stared at the screen, at the ghost ledger that proved his entire life was a house of cards I had personally decided to fold. But the status flip wasn't finished yet. Outside, the crunch of gravel beneath heavy tires signaled a new movement, a surgical strike of pure presence that made the remaining guests turn their heads toward the grand windows. A fleet of 6 blacked-out executive sedans swept into the driveway, their headlights cutting through the night like searchlights. This wasn't the arrival of family friends or local socialites. This was a motorcade of power. My brother Leo, ever the golden boy chasing the glow of status, rushed to the window. Who is that? Did someone call the police? Or is it the board of directors? It's not for you, Leo, I said, my voice a calm resolution that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. The front doors were opened by my father's own security staff, men who had been on his payroll for a decade, but who now stood with a rigid new deference. Into the foyer stepped Julian Vane, the man known as the executioner of Wall Street. Behind him followed a phalanx of legal aides and tech analysts, all carrying the same signature Ether Global briefcase I had on the table. Julian didn't even glance at my father. He didn't acknowledge the power attorney sister or the surgeon brother. He walked straight to me and bowed his head slightly. "The transition is complete, ma'am," Julian said, his voice carrying the weight of a permanent foreclosure on the past. "The hostile takeover of Sterling Textiles was finalized 10 minutes ago. All voting shares have been moved to your private trust. The city's economic council is waiting for your signature on the redevelopment plan for the waterfront. They were surprised to find out the architect they've been dealing with for 3 years was celebrating a birthday tonight." My father's social mask finally shattered completely. He didn't just look defeated. He looked like a ghost in his own home. "Julian, you work for her? I've been trying to get a meeting with you for 18 months. I sent you 3 dozen proposals." Julian turned slowly, his eyes reflecting a cold medical shock of disdain. "Mr. Sterling, you didn't send proposals to me. You sent them to my junior associates. And every one of them was rejected by the CEO herself because they were built on ghost numbers and inflated egos. You were trying to beg for a vantage from the very person you were calling a leech. At the dinner table tonight, the mirror paradox was now a blinding light." My mother let out a small, strangled sound as Julian handed me a fresh set of keys. Not to a car, but to the entire Sterling holding vault. The family members who had stayed were now backing away from my parents, moving toward me as if hoping to catch some of the glow before the room went dark. They saw the janitor had become the sovereign. "You see, Dad," I said, taking the keys and placing them into my vintage briefcase. "You spent 25 years worrying about the Sterling name. You were so busy protecting the name that you forgot to build the business. You wanted a lion for a son, but you got a predator for a daughter. And predators don't care about names. We care about results." I looked at the motorcade waiting outside. The status flip was no longer a secret family drama. It was the birth of a new dynasty. The janitor was leaving, and the architect was taking the keys to the city with her. The medical shock of Julian Vane's presence had turned the room into a vacuum. My father looked like a man who had been struck by lightning, but was still forced to stand. He watched as his own security team, the men he had handpicked to protect his vantage, now formed a silent wall behind me. The mirror paradox was complete. The more he had tried to diminish me to make himself feel large, the smaller he had actually become. He was a king with no crown, standing in a castle that had already been sold from under his feet. "Julian, there must be a mistake," my mother whispered, her social mask finally cracking into a jagged mess of desperation. "This is Maya, our daughter. She's just upset because of the birthday announcement. We can fix this. We can incorporate her hobby into the family brand. We'll give her a title." "A title?" I laughed, and the sound was a surgical strike that cut through her delusion. "Mother, you still don't get it. I don't want a seat at your table. I bought the table. I bought the room. I bought the air you're breathing. You don't incorporate the ocean into a puddle." I turned to Julian, my voice assuming the cold resolution of a sovereign. "Julian, execute the permanent foreclosure protocols. Since the Sterling Trust is officially insolvent and the debt has been called in, this property is now under the direct management of Ether Global. I want the locks changed by midnight. I want the ghost ledger of the personal accounts frozen. And I want the staff, the real staff, the ones my father hasn't paid in 2 months, to be given their full bonuses and retained under my name." "Maya, you can't," Leo yelled, stepping forward, his face flushed with a medical shock of entitled rage. "Where am I supposed to go?" "My residency. My reputation. If people find out you've done this, I'll be a laughingstock. You should have thought about your reputation before You used the company credit line to pay for your golden boy. Lifestyle, Leo, I said, not even looking at him. You wanted me to be independent with nothing? Now it's your turn. You have 10 minutes to take whatever you can carry. The sports car stays. The designer watches stay. Anything bought with sterling funds is now ether property. If you touch so much as a silver spoon on your way out, Julian will have you arrested for grand larceny before you hit the driveway. The status flip was so absolute it felt physical. My sister Claire, the power attorney who had spent her career drafting contracts to protect the wealthy, was now staring at a contract she couldn't break. She saw the surgical strike I had orchestrated, the way I had boxed them in legally, financially and socially. She knew there was no loophole. I hadn't just beaten them, I had deleted them. As for you, Dad, I said, looking at the man who had tried to disown me an hour ago. You told me the sterling name was for winners. You've lost. You lost the company, you lost the house, and most importantly, you lost the only person who was actually keeping you relevant. You're not a sterling anymore. You're just a man with a very expensive suit and a very empty future. I signaled to the security team. They stepped forward, their movements synchronized and cold. The glow of the party was officially dead. One by one, the relatives scrambled to leave, terrified that their own connections to the sterling ghost would bring them down too. The janitor had finished the sweep. The architect was now the only one left standing in the light. The resolution of the Sterling dynasty didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in the quiet, cold aftermath of a birthday party that never was. As the last of the black sedans pulled away from the estate, the glow of the house felt different. It was no longer the borrowed warmth of a dying empire. It was the sharp, clinical light of a new era. I stood in the grand foyer, watching through the glass as my parents and siblings stood on the gravel driveway, clutching small suitcases like refugees from a war they had started themselves. My brother Leo looked back at the house, his face a medical shock of disbelief. He had spent his life thinking the walls were made of stone. He realized too late they were made of credit, and I had just revoked his access. My father's shoulders were slumped, his powerful boss stature gone, replaced by the hollow frame of a man who had traded his soul for a social mask that finally shattered. They were stepping into a world where they were nobodies, while I was stepping into the seat they had spent 25 years telling me I didn't deserve. The board is waiting for the press release. Ma'am, Julian said, standing behind me. The headline reads, Ether Global acquires Sterling Textiles, founder's daughter named CEO. Shall I send it? Send it, I said, my voice a calm, surgical strike against the past. I walked into my father's, now my office. I didn't sit in his chair immediately. I walked to the window and watched the sun begin to rise over the city. The mirror paradox was finally settled. For years, I was the ghost they tried to hide, the janitor they expected to clean up their messes. Now I was the architect of their survival. And they would spend the rest of their lives wondering how the girl they disowned became the woman who owned them. I am Maya, no longer a sterling, but something much greater. I don't need a name to define my worth. I have the vantage, I have the power. And as the city woke up to the news of my ascension, I finally let out the breath I had been holding for a quarter of a century. The status flip was complete. The lion was gone and the sovereign was home.